Well, I just went, I'm streaming now, so let me see if I'm, oh, goodness. You know, all the testosterone. It's overwhelming. All right, so we're live on Periscope. Let me check on Twitch. So I always just run through a little check. It's extremely unprofessional, but it's just me. And so, we're live. We are live on Twitch. Yes, so we're live on Twitch, and it looks like we are live on YouTube. So we already have comments hopping up on there. So let me get the pop-out chat for that. YouTube. Yes, I'll keep track of questions. Huh. Let me see if I can get the pop-out chat on my phone really quickly because it's loading weird on my laptop. All right, so yeah, it's, you know, it's a constant challenge. All right. I'm okay. Why can't I? I can't get it there. Okay, can anybody pull up YouTube on their copy link? Here. Oh God. I'm supposed I don't know why it doesn't show up in my Hangouts on here that I'm in a call on my phone. I can't seem to get it. What? Okay. Oh goodness. Please bear with us while we pull up the pop-out chat. I think my bandwidth is completely eaten up right now with all of the stuff I'm running, so I can't. Yes. I don't know how to. That's a problem. Okay, so far we haven't had a. Yeah, I can only hear Mel too. Well, crap. Nobody can hear you guys. So let me fix that right now. All right. Nobody can hear you guys. All right, we're gonna. All right. Can you guys hear him now? All right. Can you guys hear everyone now? Please let me know on YouTube. No, you can't hear me. What the heck is going on? All right, so let me. I've got my desktop audio on. All that's on. Not a peep. Yeah. Yeah, you don't see me there. So I think nobody's muted because I can hear them all. So, oh, okay. This is why everything makes me nuts. All right, so let me see. How do I fix this? Let me add sound and add a sound option. Well, I'm trying to see how I add a sound option. So, settings. You know, this was set up fine before, and for whatever reason. Okay. I've got desktop audio device 2. My headset is working, and that's there. And so that should be coming through. I don't know why it's not. Somebody please just... No, they hear me. They don't hear you guys, which is weird. And I've got this set here. Properties. Let me change this to...
He has the wrong switch on, and none of us come through, and the only thing that's
I got it. I fixed it.
Sweet.
Let us all talk, and can they hear us? Has the wrong switch on.
Hey, yes, we hear you.
Fantastic.
Hurrah.
Okay.
Great technology.
Yes. So, do you have a URL you can send everybody else, Carl? Because they're just like, I'm not able to
like for the YouTube live stream?
Yes. Can you send it to the
chat?
I
can do that now that my Wi-Fi works. Let me give that a shot.
Okay, that would be great. Okay. So, now I can get started because everything works.
Yes, because otherwise no one would have heard us.
Everything is now going from terrible to awesome.
Yes, I was
optimal.
Oh, I was telling Nicholas about my day already because I got to witness a car accident. That was not fun. And I was in the rain for an hour.
Good.
So that's why my hair is up, because it got like soaking wet in the rain. I had on a white t-shirt, but then it turned pink because, you know, this isn't my natural hair color. So that gave me away really quickly. So, but there you go. All right. So tonight I'm going to go ahead and get started because you're like 5 minutes fixing stuff. So tonight, in this episode of Spirited Science, we are talking about the incomparable Alan Turing, and just in time for Pride Month. And this also is kind of interesting because just last Saturday, I did an episode on depression, because that was the topic that kind of won out. And so we touched a bit on how LGBTQ individuals have a higher risk of depression and suicide, and particularly in the trans community. Now, Alan Turing was not trans, but he was gay. And so he was in a period of time where this was not acceptable at all. It was illegal. And so we'll touch a bit on that. But we also want to kind of celebrate Alan Turing and all of his amazing work that he's done. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to play my really awesome intro and get started. Okie dokie. Yeah, it does actually pick up sound, but that's okay. Okay, so Alan Turing. Looks like Carl dropped out somehow. Hopefully he'll be back. We're at Google Hangouts.
Demons again.
Yeah, you know, Google Hangouts has been really wonky lately. I don't know what it is, but almost every single Google Hangout I've had has had some kind of buggy, weird issue. Okay, so Alan Turing...
He's back perpendicular.
And Carl got kicked out. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what exactly he worked in. Carl, I gave you an assignment on code breaking.
I just got back on the call, so is that you tossing to me to talk about code breaking?
Yes, I figured I would start with you and have you go in a little bit with code breaking. You work a little bit in computer science, don't you?
I do a fair amount of stuff with computers. I've always been a bit of a computer geek. My degrees are all in remote sensing and optics and things like that. But I've always kind of enjoyed playing around with computers, and cryptography is an interesting area. So I'd be kind of a quick high-level overview. So during World War II, I think a lot of folks have probably heard about the Enigma machine. It was a German machine that was used to encrypt communications between commanders and troops. And so it worked effectively. There was a set of rotors, and each rotor had a mapping between each letter and some other letter in the alphabet, effectively. So you have, say, 26 input letters and 26 output letters, and the mapping from one to another is fixed for that rotor, but it's very complicated, and it's kind of a way of jumbling up the letters. And there were 3 rotors on that machine. And in order to configure the machine for encryption, you would set the rotors to specific positions. And then as you received the message over the communications channel and you type in the letters, the rotors would rotate and the letters would conduct electrical signals through the rotors, but each rotor would scramble the letters differently. And what wound up happening, of course, is you get out something on the other side that looks like gibberish, and then they would reverse that process to go back the other way. Well, Turing's contribution to this was he figured out a way to help expedite the process of figuring out that secret initial setting of those rotors that the Germans were using to encrypt their messages each day. So each day they came up with a new random set. And what Turing figured out was that you could use what's called, I think it's called templating. So there's parts of when you send an email or when you send a formal letter, there's parts of that letter that are consistent and repeatable. So that's like the to and a colon and the name of the person it's to and the from and things like that. And so what you could do is you could use what you know about the messages the Germans were sending. You know parts of what the output of the message should look like. And you could use that to quickly cycle through all the possible letter combinations and figure out which ones are giving you the right answers. And so he helped develop a machine called the bomb, which was basically, it would take copies of these rotors and spin them at high speed and feed messages that they had intercepted of the German fleet through that machine until they got a match. And when that happened, this huge brake would kick in and these quickly spinning rotors would slam to a halt. And that would be the code for the day. And from that point on, the Allies could decrypt all the Navy traffic that the Russians were sending to their submarines. This allowed the Allies to effectively avoid what were called the wolf packs, these roving gangs of German U-boats that were devastating shipping across the Atlantic. And so it was a huge contribution and had a major effect on the result of the war.
Wow. That was a lot of work. And I actually failed to introduce our panel tonight, so that's kind of good ushering in. Carl knows stuff about computers, and he works a bit, as he said, in geolocation and stuff like that. So that's Carl. Yep. We have RJ. RJ is, like I'd mentioned before, a bit of my wild card tonight. So he's here with us. And then we have Kyle from the Non Sequitur Show. He's always fun to talk to. I think
Hi.
And he's sideways.
He's sideways. Kyle is, I think, sideways.
Am I still?
I wonder. You are sideways.
Sideways and cropped. Very nicely done.
I'm not having any luck with.
He's already had too many drinks.
He's had too many Turing cocktails already. Kyle is with the Non Sequitur Show. I like to kind of play a little bit, say he's one of my gay husbands. So
Yes.
we share recipes.
Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
You're now right side up.
Okay.
He's right side up. And then we have Nicholas with us, who is in computer science as well. How are you doing, Nicholas? He's kind of new to this. I haven't had him on one of my shows before. And he's on Twitter. And so what I'm trying to do with this particular show is pull people in from the gen pop, as we say, and give them something associated with a particular science topic and have them just run with it and tell us what they learned. So that's one thing I like to do with this show. Then we have Tony Reed. Tony's never been on my show before. I've been in other chats with him. So,
Tony,
say hi. You saying hi? I don't hear you.
and we are not hearing you.
No.
And you have the best voice. Like that's what you're known for, Tony. You got to get that in here.
So what I'll do is
Tony was muted earlier.
Yeah. Is he?
But he's not now.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is, if you're not familiar with Tony or the Non Sequitur Show or RJ, they all have YouTube channels as well. RJ talks a lot about evolution. The Non Sequitur Show, they always do a lot of debates and other type of information type of shows, which is really cool. I've been on that a few times, and Tony has a lot of really interesting videos. It is a simple way to put it.
It's a very simple way to put it.
But you have you also have debate roulette, which is a lot of fun. So that's a lot of fun to kind of see how that goes. And then so I'll put those links to their channels in the description at the end of this, and you guys click and subscribe. It's really, really cool. Tony, have you sorted out the sound yet?
Apparently not.
Apparently not. Son of a motherless goat. Okay. Well, while
that's what you're known for, Tony. You have one job.
He's like, it's trying. While Tony works on sound. All right. So Carl was talking a bit about the code breaker. RJ, what can you throw in there about that? What do you know about?
Yeah. Well, they had one fabulous break. The mentioning of the naval aspect was extremely important because these involved the submarine traffic that were just killing the British. They were sinking ships so fast that it was looking like they were going to lose the war over this. This was no trivial detail. And this unbreakable code was driving everybody nuts. They managed finally to find an actual Enigma machine that was not destroyed when a submarine was attacked. And before they could actually get rid of the thing, the Navy jumped in and glommed onto it. But that only showed them the mechanism. Without knowing the codes that you were plugging into it, it was just a machine. But what in effect they ended up creating was a simulation of the machine that could work way faster than the Germans could. So you would see these clunkers on the submarines going through the rotor settings and setting everything up. Meanwhile, back in London, they would hear the traffic, put them into the system, click, 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 here's the result. They were actually, by the end of the war, they were decoding German codes faster than the Germans were decoding them. Now, this made a problem because if you reveal too much of your information, they would realize that somebody had broken the damn Enigma machine. So sometimes they had to let things slide by. Ships might be attacked at others. And it was another one where they had broken the code was on the Battle of Coventry, where they knew that the German air attack was going to bomb the city. And they couldn't do a damn thing about it because to reveal that and put up the anti-aircraft fire would have meant they would have known that it was coming, and therefore they had broken the codes and they would switch everything. Decoding thing actually produced some really tough moments for people in the military as to how deep do you keep this secret.
Well, gosh, I can't imagine having to be on the end of having this information and being the one saying, okay, we're going to let this attack happen, but not this one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that that they don't catch on to the fact that you're following their every word. The last time I was over in England, I actually had a chance to go up to the National Museum of Computing up in Bletchley Park. And they actually have one of these bombs that's actually in working order. They just actually moved it to a different room or different facility up there. But watching that thing work is really quite stunning. It makes a lot of noise, and those rotors are spinning really fast. But it is really a sight. If you're ever in London, it's worth it to take the day trip up there just to see that thing.
That's cool.
I think they used it in the movie with Cumberbatch.
Mm-hmm.
They used shots of it in the movie that Cumberbatch made about it.
Cool.
Yeah, and they'll actually demonstrate it right there.
So,
sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just saying, I've read about it. I've never seen it. It'd be cool to see it. It'd be a neat sight.
Yeah,
if you're familiar with the old Babbage machines from the 19th century that were all gear based, just upgrade it to gears plus vacuum tubes. And so it was very hot. It was slow by modern day standards, but this thing was effectively breaking new ground. What Turing would have done with an integrated circuit.
Oh,
Right. Yeah.
Man, it's pretty interesting just how effective he really was at doing this type of work. And I can't imagine the kind of strain that put on him as a person. Being like, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're our only hope. It's just like, if we don't have you breaking these codes, we're going to lose the war. And there are some historians that have sat there and have thought if they didn't break the enigma, the war could have gone a very different way. Especially with...
I put a blurb up there of the Bletchley Circle. Anybody should kind of Google that and find out a bit about it. I think there's been some BBC documentaries and also shows. An awful lot of the people who worked at the Bletchley Circle who did code breaking were women. That's another aspect that's recently come out, and that they were at the cutting edge, and they couldn't talk about some of this stuff until only recently because of the Official Secrets Act.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah, I read a book recently called The Code Breakers that talked about the race between cryptographers, who are the people who develop algorithms for hiding these codes in plain sight, and cryptanalysts, who are the ones.
Well,
he's been attacked by demons again.
We just lost multiple people at the same time.
He's been raptured.
What in the heck is going on with Google Hangouts? Google, and it's attacking
there's storms all over the country, so there could be effects on local power supplies and all sorts of things. I said I'm hearing thunder here, so if I disappear, you'll know what happened.
It's just going to be me now.
It's all to spite us.
Oh my gosh, it's just like the Google Hangout gods are just like, not today, Satan. Delete.
I got thrown out again.
Kyle, you're
ironic
just too
being
well
about the subject of
behaved.
Turing.
This is
about information
I know
flow.
that's what I'm saying. Usually I'm not this well behaved, and I have to stay the entire time.
I made it back.
Yay.
We thought you might have been booted out by the Official Secrets Act.
I might have been. Maybe I got too close to revealing
I'm beginning to wonder.
that nobody wants you to know.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, an awful lot of the secrets of World War II were of this information thing. If you're familiar with Hedy Lamarr and her work on signal jumping that was never used during the war, but is the reason why everybody has cell phones today, there was an awful lot of fundamental thinking about how you encode information and how you can create things that operate at a higher level. And that's where Turing was coming in at the theoretical end, which we'll get to more when we dive into the biology side of Turing and then the artificial intelligence side of stuff.
Goodness gracious. So, Nicholas, you wanted to talk a little bit about, and I don't know if Kyle, maybe you and Kyle can talk a bit about, I know Nicholas wanted to talk a bit about his childhood in regards to losing his friend. Kyle, do you have anything on that too?
I do, but he can go ahead. I've got, I didn't know how detailed you wanted us to go. So
however detailed you want to go, dear. That's entirely.
I've got 40 points. I wrote
40 points. Do you want to go?
Man.
Okay, how about you and Nicholas? Okay, Nicholas, talk a little bit about the childhood friend, and then I'll toss it over to Kyle a little bit, and we'll do a bit of back and forth on that, about the loss of his friend and how that goes. I'm having a Turing, by the way, so cheers, Alan. Hopefully. Thank you for your work. It's the cocktail associated with this talk. Yeah,
I put it
on Twitter. Yeah, put it on Twitter and Google Plus. Okay, so if you don't know what the Turing is, this is what the cocktail is. I thought I shared this with you, my gay husband.
Look, I'm involved in like at least 30 Twitter wars a day with people, so I never get to play it.
You sound a bit like me, but I just ignored most of those people. But it's fine.
I live for that shit.
See, after a while, I'm just like, I'm kind of done. So, a Turing cocktail essentially is Prosecco, okay? You take Prosecco, you take some orange vodka, all right? And you've got some bitters. So what you do is you take a sugar cube, you coat it in bitters, you toss it in a flute, or put it in the flute first, then add the bitters. You add your orange vodka, about an ounce, and then you top it off with the Prosecco.
And what is Prosecco? I'm not familiar with that.
Where did the inspiration come from?
I wanted, because I figured Turing would have been forced to have a manly man drink. You must have some whiskey type of derivative. And I'm like, I want to celebrate Turing and have something that would be almost like a champagne cocktail. So it still holds a bit of that traditional aspect, but with a twist with the vodka orange. It's all sparkly, and so it's just a little bit of an extra kick. So it's not so... I mean, I make a lot of whiskey drinks, but I think I wanted something bubbly and celebratory to kind of like, even though posthumously accept Alan Turing as he is, and be like, perhaps he would have drank a big old bubbly drink and be like, you know, screw it, this is what I want to do. So
That's
why you're my gay wife. Straight wife.
I must.
What's the terminology there?
Oh, your gay husband. I'm a straight wife, I guess. Yeah, I guess that's the way.
I'm glad we got that middle.
I have several gay husbands. I have a whole harem of them.
You whore.
Interchangeable, like Lego blocks.
Okay, so it's like you're maybe like the third or fourth.
Third or fourth?
Oh man.
Yeah.
It was very nice meeting you all. I suddenly have to go. Google gods, please kick me out again.
Is there a hierarchy?
There really isn't a hierarchy. Everybody is equal in that particular. There is no alpha gay.
That's your
It's
problem.
okay.
That's your problem.
There's no alpha gay with.
All
with
right.
my gay
Just wanted to
husband.
establish that.
Equal time, so it's fine.
Ugh.
Oh my
I
goodness.
don't do well with that.
So back to Turing's background.
Yes.
Jump in there.
Childhood.
We just lost. We're losing the same pair of folk.
I don't know why. What's
time.
going on?
Well,
Okay, so
You
Nicholas.
got the ball, Nicholas.
All right.
Go
What a
with it
world.
with the childhood thing. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I was only going to talk about this very briefly because one of the things that I kind of find fascinating is kind of looking at causality in reverse, because I think it can be kind of fascinating to think about. Oh, well, everything in my life actually happened because of this chance meeting between these two people, you know, who are people that I know now. But if I hadn't met, you know, someone else, then I wouldn't be sitting where I am today. And so I like to kind of look at how things were affected by a single event somewhere in the past. And you can trace a lot of what happened in Alan Turing's life. And I won't steal all of your thunder on this, but I just wanted to mention that you can trace a lot of everything that happened later on and led to, you know, developments in computer science, developments in computational theory, all the way back to the death of one person, which is basically Alan Turing's childhood crush, his friend Christopher Morcom, which kind of, in a way, inspired Turing to start thinking about things like the theory of mind and the theory of computation and what's computable, what is a mind, what do you lose when someone dies. And there's a passage from a letter that Alan wrote, and it's in this book, which is what I'm looking at here. Quite good, by the way. I'm just going to read one sentence from it. This is from a letter that Alan wrote to Christopher's mother, where he says, "I know I must put as much energy, if not as much interest into my work as if he were alive, because that is what he would like me to do." So I kind of see this as, you know, and this letter was actually on display at the Turing exhibit that they had at the London Science Museum back in 2012, which I was lucky enough to see when I was over there. And I found it actually somewhat moving, and it kind of read to me like, you know, my friend died, but now I want to, you know, I kind of want to live up to what he would have liked me to continue on doing. So that's the extent to which I wanted to just kind of focus on that death for just a moment. But then kind of moving forward, I can talk a little bit more about some of the computer science that sort of came from that, if you want, Mel. I don't know if you...
Okay. Well, sure. I thought I would toss it over to Kyle a little
if you
bit
want
to talk.
toss it to Kyle, then that's cool too.
So what do you,
You don't
have to
you don't
add?
have to, really. Well,
We're going to count off all 40 of the points, Kyle.
I didn't want to just keep going on and on and on if Kyle wanted to say something.
Again, I don't know how like deep into it you want me to get, because I kind of went a little overboard, I think.
No, it's okay. Go all the way.
Let us board, Kyle.
You know, I love it when you say that, Mel.
Oh boy.
I'll just hit the I'll just go through and hit the bigger points then.
You can talk about whatever you want. So that's, kind of the point. So everything that you've learned and want to express, that is entirely up to you.
Well, there's a lot to him, obviously, but to Nick's point about the impact that it had on Turing's life after he passed, there's a lot of debate on whether or not that's what led to ultimately him being an atheist too. That's what I found the most interesting. There are a lot of back and forth between people online and people who study his life and things like that want to point that particular moment in his life that kind of led to his outlook on religion. And I mean, if I had to, just being a layman looking into this, I would think that would have a profound impact on somebody's life if you lose somebody like that, I think. But I got down that Turing's father was the son of a clergyman. He, the Reverend John Robert Turing. He was from a Scottish family of merchants that had been based in the Netherlands. His mother was Ethel Sarah. She was the daughter of, I'm telling you, I went into detail. I don't want to bore anybody. I'm going to kind of go through here and hit the key points. The Stoneys were a Protestant Anglo-American gentry family from both counties in Langford, while Ethel herself spent much of her childhood in the County Clare. I'm just kind of giving the backdrop on the religious side, because that's what I deal with a lot on our show. I deal with religion. So I tried to search through his life and pick out the key points and what shaped him ultimately, like what he grew up with in terms of religion, and then looking to where he might have lost it.
Right. Okay.
Let me see. I'm gonna skip over a lot of this stuff.
So Kyle, I'm curious what you think. This is Carl chiming in here. I'm curious what you think about the idea that the death of a childhood friend was a big driver in his eventual outlook and his. I guess I didn't realize he was an atheist later in life, but I don't know. It always kind of strikes me as cliche, but maybe that's just because that hasn't been my personal experience. Maybe it is for others. I don't know. So I'm curious what other folks think about that change.
I think cliches are often true.
Fair.
You for his outlook in what I read in the relationship that they had, he considered him his first love. And for somebody that is trying to or having to hide who they really are and not be themselves, for him to find somebody that he's able to kind of open up and be himself around, and that true person that he really was, that's got to be insanely difficult to lose that. And I think that would absolutely destroy any, because I mean, you think about it, he's grown up in an era where it's not like it is today. You have to hide that because it's illegal. And when he gets that taste of what it's like to actually be the real Alan around somebody, and then that person's all of a sudden ripped away from them, you're going to be bitter and angry. And of course, the first person that you're going to look to blame is the one that took him away. So it makes sense to me, just because it's, I mean, it happens all the time, I think.
Okay.
I think it's revealing where Turing didn't go, because given this time frame that he was living in, especially growing up on as a teenager, this is a world in which spiritualism is commonplace, that Arthur Conan Doyle believed in fairies and spirits, and the fact that he doesn't go that spiritualism direction, in addition to not going in a religious direction, tells a lot about his personality and his motivations.
That's a good point. I think spiritualism certainly would have maybe provided a comfort, perhaps a false comfort, that that his friend is, still present in some ways, and certainly that can be a very strong feeling when you have a loved one that dies, or even that's just apart from you. It can feel like they're still present, and I think in my, I don't know, estimation, it seems like that's the draw of those spiritualistic beliefs.
I mean,
well, there'd been World War I too. That was a big impetus that had killed off so many people. It just had a huge driver. A lot of bereaved parents got into spiritualism because of the war, killing off their kids.
When you look at a biological standpoint, when people lose a part of their body, they still have those ghost feeling type of sensations. So it would make sense for us to still carry that type of feeling, thinking, oh, they're with me now. They're still here with me. They're still a part of me. Mm-hmm. And that can still be a very real experience for people. So, and it's also a bit of a comfort, too, to kind of think that. So I can kind of understand that would, but at the same time, Turing is clearly a heavy analytical and critical thinker. And so he probably would be like, yes, this is what it would feel like if they were still with me, but they're not. And so you always have the part of your brain going, I understand that's what this is. It's like when I was little, I used to have sleep paralysis. So I was convinced that our house was haunted and there were demons because nobody knew that's what that was. And so, I'm like, I have weird monks sitting on my dresser and looking at me funny. What the heck is this? But it's sleep paralysis. That's a thing that exists, but I didn't know that's what that was.
Yeah.
And I think even Turing even went through kind of a process of this. If you look through some of his letters to Christopher's mother, he started out wondering, okay, well, Chris died, so what actually became of the essence of Chris? Where is he now? Is he anything now? And if I can't go into great detail about it, but you kind of see this progression as the letters go, and as Turing grows up and gets a little bit older and starts thinking critically and getting at the essences of things. You see that he kind of eventually very, very solidly comes to the realization, well, no, there's nothing left of Christopher. Like the essence of Christopher is gone. And I think that's, either around the same time or kind of tying into the experience of him becoming an atheist.
Huh. That's interesting. When I think about those same kinds of questions, it seems to me that yes, what was that specific person is gone, but in a very real way, their memory and their influence on the people around them lives on, and it's sort of maybe not the real person, but an echo of that person that is still, I think, very meaningful.
Sure. I mean, you end up with whatever influences that they had exerted on the people around them. Yeah. That certainly, the fact that we're sitting here having a conversation using computers, right. Like I was saying in the beginning, kind of all of this can tie all the way back to the influences that Christopher had over Alan Turing while they were both very young. He was, apparently a very scientifically curious kid. They did like lots of, good sciencey stuff together. So, certainly, as you say, the influences of him, you could even argue kind of were perpetuated all the way forward to present day. Yeah. But it's just kind of interesting to watch that progression if you read kind of through some of the letters of kind of his thought process going through that, which fortunately is kind of is sort of captured in a way because he wrote quite a lot to Christopher's mother. Kind of fascinating.
Are those captured?
Was he much of a letter writer otherwise?
That I don't know. I haven't read letters other than the ones that he had written to Mrs. Morecambe, but there's a lot of those just captured in this book, which I highly recommend.
I don't think he ever got over it, personally. I think that stayed with him, and it led to what eventually happened to him. Absolutely.
Same way Darwin and the death of his daughter, and Thomas Huxley and the death of his son. It's on you, and it's easier to have a world in which there aren't any gods because then there's no one to blame.
Yeah.
it is pretty. It you know, death can actually, you know, is having dealt with not that. I've never had to deal with a childhood love passing away, and you know, somebody that I felt like I could be myself, because I haven't had that life, so I can't relate to that in any capacity. But I can kind of get an idea that when you have like what's been said here, when you have somebody where you can be who you are safely and actually explore who it is that you are with another human in a safe environment to kind of see and learn more about yourself, and to have that only source of joy gone, that has to be an extremely traumatic experience. You know, and hope kind of probably dies a bit with it, I would think, to being able to try to find that again. So it's it's a bit profound for me, because I haven't had to deal with it on that level to where like my love would be illegal for, you know, a dude, you know, because that's okay in that world. It's all right to be that. You can't love people that are your same sex, because that's just wrong and illegal, and they'll put you in jail, which it was illegal at the time. So Kyle, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I want to go through. I just wrote down a couple points about Christopher real quick.
Sure, go for it.
Turing formed a significant friendship with, obviously, Christopher, who later described him as his first love. Their relationship provided inspiration in Turing's future endeavors. It was cut short by his death in February of 1930 from complications of bovine tuberculosis, contracted after he drank infected cow's milk. I didn't know that you could even get it like that.
Gosh,
Oh, in the good old days before pasteurization, milk could be very deadly.
Yeah, that's crazy. This event obviously caused Turing great sorrow. He coped with his grief. This is what I thought was kind of cool. The way that he coped with his grief was that he would work on mathematical equations that he and Christopher would try to solve together. And so it was like he determined to solve them now that he was no longer there. So I thought that was kind of a cool little thing. Again, some have speculated that his death was the cause of Turing's atheism. And then where'd you want me to go? Mel?
Talk a bit about, you know, if you want to talk later on how the fact it was illegal for him to be gay, and he was subjected to chemical castration for a while. It was either that or prison, wasn't it? I'm not clear on that. It was either chemical castration.
Well, and also it was deemed a national security issue, because communists theoretically could find about your dark secret and blackmail you on it. So it was just a really dicey time going on in post-war period.
He, interestingly enough, he did not keep his sexuality a secret among his friends. The laws at the time prevented Turing from being openly gay, but he never kept his sexuality a secret. He was open with his social circles at King's College in Cambridge, which was an oasis of acceptance, he later would say. Many people would have clung to that oasis, but Turing branched out in order to continue his work. In 1952, he was arrested and charged with indecency after a brief relationship with another man. Defiant, he did not deny the charges, which I thought was really, just from my point of view, inspirational. I think, you know, he didn't let them take that from him.
Very brave, yeah.
Yeah. He refused to let a punishment of chemical castration stop him from working. The punishment for homosexuality was chemical castration, which is a series of hormone injections that left Turing impotent. It also caused, gynecomastia. Is that right?
I think so.
Sure.
Okay. Giving him breasts, which He refused to let any treatment sway him from his work. Obviously, he kept his spirits lively. Then he began to sink into a deep depression when he was around 41 years old, which ultimately led to him committing suicide on the 8th of June, 1954. Next to his body was a half-eaten apple. As Turing was a massive fan of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, many speculate that the apple was laced with cyanide and that his method of suicide was a tribute to that film he loved so dearly. And then just to close it up for kind of afterwards, following an online petition, which started in 2013, Turing was given a royal pardon for his conviction 61 years after his shameful arrest. Prime Minister Gordon Brown apologized in 2009 for the appalling treatment that Turing endured. Turing was voted the 21st greatest Briton of all time. Universities all around the world have facilities dedicated to him. It's often mistaken that the iconic image of the Apple logo with the apple being half eaten is a homage to Alan Turing. I thought that was a cool.
That's kind of neat. I wish it kind of was a homage.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite people in the world is Stephen Fry. I love Stephen Fry. And he said, although Steve Jobs also confirmed that this is going back to the Apple thing, that it wasn't an intentional reference to the Turing. Steve Jobs was later quoted to Stephen Fry saying, "God, we wish it were true." So that's kind of cool.
That's pretty cool. I can only imagine if, and this is kind of something that I do touch on from time to time, especially when I'm doing, my science episodes and stuff. It's something that I taught a lot of in my classroom. I heavily pushed diversity, not because we have to meet a quota, not because of anything like that, but because, can you imagine how further we would be if we didn't do what we did to Turing, if we incorporated more women of color into engineering, like, with NASA and the fact that they were involved in programming all these computers. If we took all of this and we got rid of all of this isms, this, racism, sexism, we got rid of homophobia and that, and just looked at their brains, we could have probably solved far more problems by now. It's just, that's what bothers me a lot about people who are like, well, this is just a quota. Like, no, we need to move into the direction of incorporating diversity across the board in every facet of STEM. It's because we need the minds, people with different lives and life experiences are going to contribute perspectives that not everybody else has. And that's important. So for me, I can't help but think, how further would we be if we didn't put those pressures on Turing? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think
we are. I think we are moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Finally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you never really know quite where the next really brilliant idea might come from. You never know, like, what kid in your classroom might be the next Alan Turing, and are they going to be kind of beaten down by their peers, or are they going to be kind of lifted up and encouraged? And I mean, there's no telling what we missed out on because Turing died when he was kind of right about my age. Had he lived on like through the Silicon Revolution, what might he have done? And there's so much potential that can be lost just out of just sheer bigotry, not for any even good reason.
If you've seen the old Doctor Who episode on where they have the praise for Vincent van Gogh, it's could do with Turing. Because if you went at a time machine back to that period and you were seeing what they were trying to do to him, you would go, "Are you nuts?"
Yeah.
I just, I cannot get through that Van Gogh episode without crying my eyes out. I actually had the pleasure. I talked about this in the episode I did on depression. I actually had the pleasure to go to Chicago, and I saw all the bedroom pieces side by side, and I saw all of the work that he had done, but I could not for the life of me get it out of my head, the mental torment that he was in the entire time he painted the things, the stuff in the asylum. I just wept. I stood in the Chicago Art Museum and cried my eyes out. I'm like, there are all the bedrooms. This man is brilliant, and he will never know how freaking brilliant and how much we love him now. And other people are like, yeah, there's Van Gogh, selfie. I'm just like, do you not understand? And I'm just sitting there just, I'm just like,
I feel the same way about Schubert. Poor Schubert, who died of syphilis with none of his orchestral works performed, that some people had said that he had some talent, but for all practical purposes, he must have felt he was a complete failure. And there's no way, unless there's a heaven, which I don't believe in, but there's no way that he could know that he's an absolute icon of early Romantic composers. And that's sad that he would never have known that.
It's just, it's grossly unfair. So yes, if they really need to do an Alan Turing Doctor Who episode.
I wonder in modern times, with easier access to publication, if we're getting better at identifying these geniuses in our society, or if they're just getting swamped by the noise and the chaos and all the people shouting I don't know. Has society gotten better in that regard?
Well, we have. I'll give you a measure of it. Turing, in one of his last papers that he did, worked out this morphological mathematical theory of cell structure and how forms can come about through absolute mathematics. And it was just an absolutely theoretical thing. DNA still hadn't developed the codon system yet. It was all absolutely hypothetical. In 2012, 100 years after Turing was born, the scientists worked out that the structure of zebra stripes and a whole bunch of things are actually Turing systems that are generated inside the cellular systems because of the operation of all of these genes, and they produce Turing cycles. So it took that long for the science to catch up 70 years after he was dead.
Wow.
That just made my little nerd heart flutter, man. That's just awesome. I'm just like, oh my God, Turing cycles inside cellular biology. What?
Yeah, and imagine what contributions he would have done had he lived on to be able to see the genetic information firsthand. What would he have done had he been able to look at homeobox genes in the 1990s and go, a light bulb, aha!
Oh, God.
But we have no, he's dead in 1954.
And see, I know, and people kind of see DNA as, they call it a code, and there's a lot of back and forth between people. Or like say, well, that's intellectual design, intelligent design, whatever. The thing is that it does code for amino acid sequences. But who better than to develop a model for how DNA comes together, and can you imagine what he could contribute to like genetic, evolutionary type of genetics on how the mutation rates and stuff like that, if he were around to sit there and say, okay, I have an equation based on the mutation rates associated with this gene here that we see in this population, boom, and you'll be like, well, then we'll expect an abnormality every 50 years or 60 years or however long, and then we would see this pop up. We should see it in this population here. Man.
Well,
my question would be, though, Mel, what would he say about ATP synthase?
He would probably not be in a true empiricist
with that because you'd be looking at that, and you'd be looking at the structure of flagella and all of the other rotational systems that can come about.
I don't even know what it is.
It's the little power cell. It's the little power cycle that runs the cells, and the mitochondria spew it out, those little endosymbionts, those bad cases of indigestion where we are inherited the cells that couldn't quite digest each other 2 billion years ago.
Okay, I'm gonna give Kyle
that True was talking about.
Oh God,
Me and Mel had a nightmare hangout with a guy that probably said ATP synthase 1,000 times.
Oh,
at least.
that was a sideguard.
Every other word.
You guys thought he
ATP.
wasn't going to
Oh,
show
good.
up. You thought he wasn't going to show up, and they're like, "Hey, Mel, can you come?" I'm like, "I'll be right
bumped into
there."
him, but
And then I get there,
Yeah.
and then Truth
On
shows
Twitter.
up, and then it's just like, "Oh my God!" And then at some point, I'm just like, "Do you have anything else to say other than
That's his
ATP?"
argument for that's his argument for intelligent design, though. That's why we were intelligently designed.
Oh, because
Because he
ATP
thinks it's
synthase?
clever.
Yeah, the turbines. It's the turbines.
Okay. Yeah, it's just
yeah, God's okay with slavery, but boy, does he like those little biological turbines.
I just,
ATP synthase and beetles.
Okay, so here's
Yeah.
a little bit. Here's a little lesson here. If you see SYN, and this is something I would teach a bit on trying to understand scientific terminology. If it ends in ASE, that means it's an enzyme. If it has SYN in front, like SYNTH, that's like synthesis. That means it's making something. So it's an enzyme that makes something. So if you have ATP synthase, that means it's an enzyme that makes ATP.
It's almost like there's a terminology they use, a set of rules.
There is,
Crazy talk.
It's like
No
DNA
way.
polymerase. Okay, DNA polymerase. ASE is enzyme. MER means unit. Poly means many. And DNA, we know what that is. So it's an enzyme that makes many units of DNA. That's the whole
Too simple to be true. Sorry.
That's
No,
it's totally true. It's Neil deGrasse
Yeah, to think
Tyson.
how Turing might have reacted to something. I could see somebody with his kind of mathematical mind, in principle, looking at how homeobox genes function, which only were discovered in the 1990s, and saying, "Oh, I can work out alternate forms of those and figure out why Ediacara biota used the homeobox genes in this way." That's kind of what that kind of mind can do, because they can jump several steps past where you think the thing could be and intuitively understand the bigger picture and then test it out. And that's why such people that are fairly rare, you don't want to kill them.
No.
No,
I'm
it's just
gonna have to nod and smile on that one.
So
God.
James, do you think there's an analogy or an equivalence between the work that we're doing to try to understand the structure of the codes in the genome and the kind of cryptanalysis that Turing was doing during the war? Again, trying to look at a series of codes and make sense of it.
Oh, yeah, and the extent evolution, of course, is weird because it's if your computers boinked each other and made babies. And therefore you have mutations. So that makes an entirely different dynamic there.
Sure.
But you still got the structure that the essence of Turing is that if it can be described mathematically, it can be represented by a Turing machine. And since theoretically all genetics is a set of stuff, you can theoretically model it. But here's where the snag comes in. And this is what snags up intelligent design. Because if you just give somebody a string of A, T, C's, and G's, there's no way in hell that you can determine just by looking at it whether this is a functional gene or not, or whether it is actually from a living organism or not. And that's one of the reasons why you can't break certain kinds of codes. There may be a code there, but you can't necessarily retro-engineer it. So that's part of the difficulty of trying to deal with what all those something that's so ridiculously simple. It's more complicated than binary because it's A, T, C's, and G's, but still it's just a repetition of them. So why is it that this one little string, my favorite retrotransposon is ALU, because 10% of us is ALU. Our human genome has just 1.25 million, and they're breeding constantly. And so why is it that little string does that? And how can it therefore interfere with other stuff if it mutates a start codon or not? That's the kind of stuff that an Alan Turing style codebreaker mind can look at, the bigger issues. We still don't really know why exactly the codons are associated with particular amino acids, even though the suspicion is it has something to do with the way the chemicals are put together. But that takes a higher level analysis to do. So yeah, we're still at the level where geniuses are going to have fun, and I hope I can live long enough to see their work. Interesting stuff left to do.
Oh goodness! Somebody had says in the chat. They say I was a programmer, and if DNA were a code handed to me, I would have fired the programmer. It is so poorly written. That's true. It
Well,
has
but it
lots
works.
of flaws. It does work, but it's kind of like duct taped together with a little bit of WD-40. It's an engineer code. It's kind of like
Quiz question for the panel.
It out, right?
Quiz question for the panel. How many of you have read Gödel, Escher, Bach by Hofstadter?
I haven't read that, and I'm on the panel.
Yeah.
It is a book that you will either think it's the greatest thing you've ever read, or you'll want to blow your brains out with frustration. But it is absolutely exhilarating because it's about recursivity, it's about DNA, it's about Bach, it's about Escher's paintings, it's about Gödel and undecidability propositions, it's about nonlinearity, and it really is kind of an interesting primer that still is applicable today, even though the damn thing was written like 40 years ago. On the notion of the limits of mathematics, the limit of modeling, the external structure to things that have organization that you can't quite describe properly. And the upshot is that on the biological end of it is that the idea that DNA isn't maybe the only way you could imagine life existing, but it's the one that is the only one that's going to work well. And that it's ended up that way for a dynamic reason. So that's a little aside, and who knows what kind of contributions a Turing would have done on that. Instead, we've only got his one damn 1952 paper to work with.
Right. Well, what's kind of interesting is they've recently come out with some stuff in regards to genetics, something called dark DNA. And they call it dark DNA, not because it's like dark matter, just because they didn't know it was there before. Because in DNA, when you're looking at trying to analyze it, you have long sequences of guanine and cytosine G's and C's. And so when you're trying to find a particular gene, if you have these long sequences, you may miss the smaller genes in between them. So when you're cutting out the fat, as they say, because G's and C's are kind of like cutting the fat off the steak, trying to get to the steak. But they're in between those two little pieces of fat, there's a bit of code there. And so what they're calling
we don't know why all the circumstances of it.
Right. So the thing is, they've found, like, there was a particular rat that was missing a type of gene that was associated with every other living thing on the planet. And they're like, why doesn't this rat have this gene? They found it. It was in between two giant GC sequences. And they're like, there it is. But it codes for a bit of a less functional version of the protein. It's not as nice as the other ones, but it's still there and it works to a degree. What would be interesting is a Turing model that could predict this type of like dark DNA in various organisms to try to find where it would be hiding out.
Yeah, well, one of the things that still is exercising people, and they come up with stuff all the time, and of course, intelligent design people all get oogly boogly over it, is the higher level topology of the biological system. That you can have a little teeny promoter that's way downstream from the active gene that somehow or other is turning that gene on and off. And that, remember that you've got this weird spaghetti twist of molecules, and we have to remember too the speed involved. That this is not a matter of the ribosome making a protein and plugging an amino acid together, and then when it's all done, it snips it away, and then the thing carries it off. No, it's assemble. It's happening at such blinding speed that you have to realize that there's a whole bunch of interconnectivity that's going on that's operating at such a high level of interaction that you can't even necessarily model it. And that's why these things, when you're slowing it down into slow motion, you're wondering, what the hell is this damn promoter way downstream doing it? Because you're not looking at it real time.
Yeah.
Is that the whole idea of epigenetics? Am I remembering that correctly? That's
part of it. Epigenetics, it particularly involves. Remember, the DNA is wrapped around histones in complex organisms like us, and there's a little thing that it can't be expressed unless it's basically unwrapped, and then something can come in and do the regulation part. Well, the methylization things are like little markers that can be inherited in some respects that are saying, pay attention to this. When you come along, make sure this one gets regulated, okay? And that happens sequentially with these epigenetic markers and methylation. They can be inherited a little bit, but yet they're not directly coded into the gene system. Then the other thing that just blows me away, and I'm old enough to remember when this became a revelation, they were thinking that each gene would have one a protein to make, so that you have 100,000 proteins, you're going to have 100,000 genes. Then, no, we've only got 25,000 genes. Every gene makes multiple proteins by reading a part of them or reading it backwards or reading the cognate version, and you're going, holy shit, this is more intricate than what we were used to. Well, those are just the kind of weird levels of coding and layers of function that's right up a Turing's alley.
For sure.
I'm so mad about us not having. I get like regularly angry about the past, and it's like I didn't even know. It's like when I sat through Hidden Figures, I cheered and cried and cheered and cried. I'm just like,
oh yes, that was amazing.
I'm just like, oh my god! It's just
That was
like,
an
and then
amazing movie.
Alan Turing. I didn't even know about the biology side, so that's new for me. I'm just like, I'm so angry.
Yeah. He was fascinated with the what we would now call the meta structure of life. And given the fact that almost all of his work that he did, because he died in 54, DNA was only discovered in 52, 53, and they didn't figure out the coding system using the codons until the 1960s. So he was before. What kind of light bulbs would have gone off, or little Turing blips, had he had access to that information? You just go,
It just makes me mad. You know, and the nerd in me is still very upset that the libraries of Alexandria were burned. I'm just saying. I'm
see
very
the movie
mad
Agora?
about that.
Did you ever see the movie Agora? It's about Hypatia, the last head of the Library of Alexandria that was murdered by a rampage Christians. And it's an intriguing tale because it's based upon a speculation that we can't disprove, but it's analyzing. Hypatia to go to the 4th century on the matter of hyperbolic curves and conic sections and all that. She was a real expert on the mathematics of it. And the speculation in the story is the possibility that she might have figured out the way planets move in ellipses before Galileo and Kepler.
Wow.
And that, so the premise of the story is that here she had figured, because she realizes that a circle is just right angle, and that's explaining why Mars is moving the way it does. And unfortunately, then she's killed by the mob. And so there you are. Instead of figuring it out in 450, you're figuring it out in 1500.
I fully believe that.
Angry. I'm just angry all the time. I saw a tweet somewhere that said, I'm exhausted from being angry, but I feel like it's like not morally correct for me to not be angry, or morally irresponsible for me to not be angry. So it's like I'm angry all the time. It's exhausting, but if I'm not angry, I feel like that's wrong. So it's just
I agree.
In things to
I
come.
feel like that. I agree with you. There's for the most part, but sometimes I just feel like there comes a point where the anger just doesn't do anything but drag you down.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't pick yourself up out of that, then you get stuck in that same mindset of the people that did this to him. You know what I mean? Like it's a vicious circle.
Yeah.
I think. And eventually you have to be the
Well, you do what Turing did. You do the work.
That.
No, I agree.
Work, yeah, that's the way of dealing with the grief and the anger.
That's kind of what I try to do.
Various scientists did that. Darwin was a workaholic. The various troubles that he had in his life, happy going back to the stuff on the worms and the barnacles and that little evolution book he was working on the sly and all of that. And the same thing with a lot of science was that way. Nominally a Roman Catholic, but his cathedral was his work.
Mm-hmm. I will say what I try to do, because I don't like rant a lot on my, science social media and stuff like that. I don't find that to be productive because there's a lot of people doing that already. I try to go, here are the facts. here is the information. This is what science says. You can either take it or leave it. This is what it is. This is evidence. This is reality. So if you're arguing against reality, that is your problem. So I try to go about it in a way to where I deal with the anger by producing factual information.
Well, there's a lot of stuff to be angry about, and some people have their own definition of reality. I've been following on Twitter this just hilarious exchange. There's this guy, positivism versus negativism or something like that. I just call him P versus N for short. And he's a weird atheist, but not really a thoughtful one. And he insists that 0.999 ... does not equal 1, which is just mathematically wrong. And there's several creationists that are coming on the debate who are saying, "Oh yeah, that's absolutely correct." And so he's getting all these retweets from creationists, and Steve McRae and others, are firing into him, going, and so they live in their own little bubble. And so long as they're in their little bubble, like the flat earthers and others, it's not a problem. But if they get to be Secretary of Education or Environmental Protection Agency head, they can make a nuisance. So the anger is one aspect, but the activism is another, and we live in perilous times, gang.
And I don't get heavily political, but only when it's relevant to science on my account. And the thing is you sometimes cannot separate science from politics because they are in charge of what scientists do. What do you think, Carl?
Turing's life was a
science.
Testament to that.
Well,
the whole point of science is to try to take politics out of it, right? To try to be objective about what we can know and how we know it. And unfortunately, some people just don't agree with that approach to reality.
Yeah. I mean, even just the very statement that we should be able to trust what we can measure. Even just saying that is itself a political statement, unfortunately, because there are people who vehemently disagree with that.
You can never remove the politics and cultural frame from things. Turing was in a time when there was a big tussle between fascism and communism in the 1920s and 30s. They were at war with the Nazis. Their allies were now the Communist Soviet Union. You had a whole political bouillabaisse going on in the people that the Bletchley Circle and various Russian spies that were embedded in the British left-wing movement. You can't get away from that stuff. Farther back, one of the things that impeded some of the response to the new geology that was adding a bunch of zeros to the age of the Earth was the fact that those French are into this. They just chopped the king's head off. We can't believe in that kind of stuff. It drove Thomas Jefferson and John Adams apart. Priestley, who was the guy that discovered oxygen but didn't realize it and called it phlogiston, was literally hounded out of England because of his Unitarianism and the fact that he was for the French Revolution. They burned his house down and almost tarred and feathered him, and he moved to America. And Lavoisier got his head chopped off by the French Revolution, the guy that actually did discover the oxygen. So you can't get away from the politics side.
Especially when it comes chasing after you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we don't.
And it matters, because the one rule that you can do is that the moment you let political ideology dictate what is and is not fact in science, you get into trouble. And this is what happened with the Nazis, who decided Jew physics couldn't possibly be right. This is what happened with the Russians, who decided that bourgeois genetics can't be correct and Lysenkoism must be correct, and it destroyed their agricultural system. And so anybody who tries to say, no, this is not a true fact because it doesn't match our ideology, nature bites. It doesn't care about our opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Nature, I'm going to be Jeff Goldblum. Nature finds a way.
Finds a way. Yeah.
It
doesn't care what we think. Or like, you can push water uphill, but not indefinitely. Eventually it's going to come around to get you. And if you don't pay attention to what the facts really are, you're probably going to be on the extinction curve as a culture.
All right, so let's move back to Turing.
Yeah, back to Turing.
that was a fun tangent there.
It's like we bird walked a bit. In the South, we call that bird walking. So
yeah. I just want to know what Turing's opinion is of Daleks.
Oh, that would be great.
I'm sure he would vote no. Because they're the very essence of Nazis.
So we've lost some people. Google Hangouts has been really, really rude. It's been very rude, kicking people off. And so I'm sorry if Kyle's not able to get back on. I want to say thank you, Kyle. I've just messaged him like, I hope Google kicked you off. I'm sorry. So I'll put the link to his show, the Non Sequitur Show. If you haven't checked it out, it's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. I appear on there sometimes and say things and do stuff. So that's neat. But yeah, so check out Kyle's show, the Non Sequitur Show. Tony Reed, unfortunately, we couldn't get his sound to work. So do check out his channel. So Nicholas, you went to the Turing Museum in London. You've mentioned that a couple of times. You wanted to share a little bit of information associated with that. What you got?
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, the Turing Museum in London, or sorry, the Science Museum in London no longer has the Turing exhibit. It was there from 2012 until 2013. I just got lucky in that I had to be over there for work anyway. So I was like, oh, I'm absolutely stopping by this. Turing fanboy. They had at the time actually quite a number of pretty fascinating artifacts, including the Pilot Ace computer, which it was behind glass, so you couldn't really get right up to it. But that was kind of fascinating. That was in that time, that was a very early computer, and Turing had taken kind of a different approach to computer architecture than what was kind of the sort of prevailing thought process at the time. Kind of my impression of it is that it's sort of an analog from the old CISC style, the complex instruction set computing and complex design. Turing's design would have been more like a RISC design, a reduced instruction set, or simplified architecture. And that was one of the things that kind of strikes me about Turing, is that he was very good at staring at a problem or staring at a thing and getting right down to the bare essence of that thing. And that's kind of reflected in the Pilot Ace. It was built actually after he left the National Physical Laboratory. He spec'd it out in 1948. But you can kind of tell he got a little frustrated with the politics. He got a little frustrated with not being able to get things done. We've kind of probably all been there. But it was eventually built after his departure in 1950 there, based on the spec that he had written in 1945. And he had quit in 1948. So it was, I believe, I want to say something like 5 times faster than anything else at the time. But it was also like some order of magnitude smaller than anything else at the time. But it was also a lot more complicated for lay people to understand versus some of the other architectures that were being explored kind of at that time. But again, what really kind of struck me about that, and what struck me too about the universal Turing machine from his original kind of seminal paper on computable numbers, is that he just really had this kind of mind where he could look at a complicated problem and just keep distilling it down and down and down and down until he gets at the very essence of kind of what's really under the hood and what's really happening in reality. That's one of the things that just kind of stuck with me. The other museum, which is still there, is the National Museum of Computing. It's my favorite museum in the entire planet. I haven't been to them all, but of the ones I've been to, if you're ever in London, get on a train, go up to Bletchley Park, and you could spend the whole day there. There's a World War II museum right next door, and then there's the National Museum of Computing. And, computer nerd that I am, I could spend the entire day there, or a week there if I needed to. It's a terrific museum. They have so many exhibits that you can actually get right up next to and see, and so many machines that are actually working. They have a working Colossus. They'll actually demo it breaking codes for you while you're standing there. So absolutely fascinating. they're not paying me to say this. I just think it's a great museum, and if you're a nerd and if you're in computer science, it's just absolutely wonderful to go and see that place.
Oh wow. I've
What
not
sort
been
of
to
problems
Bletchley.
were they using the ACE-4 in the early 50s?
Sorry, I missed the first part of what you said.
Sorry.
What sort of problems were they using that initial ACE computer to try to resolve?
One of them, if I remember correctly, was there. This was around the time that there was a lot of early jet aircraft being kind of deployed, and there was a catastrophic failure or a series of
Who, the
catastrophic
comet?
failures. I'm sorry?
The comet? The comet disasters?
That sounds right. I think that's correct. Um,
It'd be
and there
around
was
that time.
there was a series of catastrophic failures, and one of the things that the ACE was used for around that time was in the analysis of, okay, what happened? Why did we have this plane crash?
Mm.
And they were able to do a lot of the calculations to try to understand the fundamentals behind what was going on there by utilizing the ACE computer.
So I think one of the things I read or I listened to in the audiobook, the Code Breakers, a while ago, is that it was very secretive at the time, but a lot of the development that was being funded to create the first computers was with the purpose of being able to expedite these code breaking activities. So get away from these big mechanical machines, being able to run through these simulations of these rotary disk encryption machines much faster.
Okay, so what do you guys think Alan Turing would think of the current technology we have?
Ha.
He'd be a happy camper.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think so, yeah. And I think I think there'd still be quite a lot of interesting problems for him to study today.
Yeah, I think
so
he'd probably
too.
be
Oh,
looking
I
at
bet
it
he
and
would
telling
think
us how
that
we could
dark
improve
matter,
it.
dark energy, and cosmology. I bet he would be veering off into those directions too. It's such a fertile mind.
Oh gosh. Okay, so moving on to like the current, net neutrality is gone now. If we were to take Alan Turing and throw him in the current world of Edward Snowden, you know, how do you think Alan Turing would respond to the lack of privacy that we have now with what Edward Snowden kind of brought upon us for that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what he might think of all of that.
I think he was probably a very loyal patriot, given what he was doing for his country at the time and the time he grew up in, where
Now,
there were very clearly divided lines between your country and your country's enemies. I think today that's less clear.
It is. I mean, and especially what's going on with immigration currently. We're like, are they really the big issue or the problem? That's
Right.
it's hard. But I found it really interesting. I watched the Edward Snowden docudrama that came out in the theaters to get a better understanding of what it was. I do read, but sometimes movies kind of help me along, and they're like, this is based on this book here. And then I go do my homework and I read a bit more. I found it utterly fascinating that, for one, he's still considered a traitor for leaking the information, essentially, that the U.S. is spying on its own people. And they can do it. They can do it right now. One of the first things that they taught me in grad school is that I'm probably on an FBI watch list because of my, being grad school for chemistry. So they already throw you on one. And I'm like, fantastic. They've probably been watching me for years anyway. Thank you, Edward Snowden. I think Alan Turing, given the very nature of his lifestyle, as being forced into privacy and knowing the implications of what it would come to for the court of public opinion, because that's essentially what that is. The court of public opinion. That's not the court of actual wrongness or morality. It is the court of public opinion that was dictating the law at the time. I think he would be absolutely appalled by the U.S. spying on its own people.
That's very possible. At the very least, the area that I think that he would certainly be interested in is the whole notion of viral interconnection. If you were to tell him that in the 21st century, you're going to have a billion people on the planet walking around with portable computers that make his devices seem pathetic by comparison, and they're all interconnected and exchanging information at the speed of light, and that somebody could theoretically put viruses in that will take them over and interconnect them and spy through their cameras automatically and all that, that would pique his curiosity and go, whoa, whoa, I think we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Oh, gosh. I don't know what's going on. Gosh.
More
Okay,
people
so
disappearing.
Kyle can't-
It's the curse. It's the curse of the topic. Alan Turing's magic ghost. There's Kyle again.
I'm back.
You're back. Wait, no, that's Carl.
Or is
Carl.
he? Could he be a simulation now?
You can't prove I'm not.
Which brings us to the Turing test. Trying to stay on topic.
Yeah.
How does Google Assistant stack up against the Turing test? Right,
God.
Oh, I must say, I've used OK Google and to find some things that I want, and it's probably as good as, you know, typing it in the thing. Recognize my voice, I think, is quite fascinating and creepy.
Mhm.
And the idea that once you have this universal Turing thing, what do you do with it? What are its limits? Should it have limits? To what extent can government do the thing? The same thing with encryption. Do you want an absolutely a system where anybody can get through the encryption no matter what? Well, that means tyrannies can do that. If you want to have a system that can be encryption proof so that nobody can break into it, nasty people can make use of that too. And it reminds us that the electronics is just as much a tool as a knife. It can be used as a scalpel or it can be used as a stiletto.
Yep.
Okay. So there's an error and Kyle's not able to pop back on because Google is being very rude. So
Google is evil.
With problems tonight.
it is, and I was actually trying to do a live stream for my patrons on Patreon last Sunday, and it was so buggy and it cut out like 10 minutes of content. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me, man? Oh goodness. Somebody's saying stuff on Twitter. Godless Silence says, ScientistMel, you'll have to check your mentions on Twitter soon. I'm scared now. I'm scared. S-K-E-R-T. Scared.
Skirt.
I'm scared. That's what I say.
Well, life has always been scary, and we can either go through it or we're not. Some threats are more important than others. Turing had to face that in World War II. When you looked at the world as it was, did you want a world where Hitler won? Nope.
Gosh, the man at High Castle though.
Oh yeah, I read the book years ago when it came out back in the 60s. I'm an old fart, but I haven't had a chance to see the TV version of it. It's more science fiction classics have been made from Philip K. Dick novels than almost any other science fiction writer. And he was weird and neurotic and provocative in thinking through the implications of what artificial intelligence means, about what society does with all of that, that we're now coming to be in a world where we actually have to kind of think about that for real. Thank you.
Well, the things that actually kind of frighten me in regard to current events and that sort of thing, and we can kind of apply it to a bit of the oppressive nature of being a homosexual man at the time that Alan Turing was around. Watching The Handmaid's Tale with a very modern feel of what would happen if that type of regime was put into place is utterly frightening to me. I am like, I've watched that and I just cringe because I'm an educated woman, so I'd either be shot or used as a handmaid. And I'm like, both are horrible outcomes. Both are utterly horrible outcomes. So I can't imagine, it's just, if I wasn't allowed to think, I wouldn't even be allowed to think. I would either have to be a baby maker or I would be killed.
I think with a degree in chemistry, you're much more likely to be a witch, aren't you?
Well, then I'd be burned. Or hung. Or they tie a rock
But
to
no,
me and throw me into a wire.
this is where the science fiction writer, as a person who gets onto the pulse of the brain, that they can do the thought experiment and think about the thing. So something like Fahrenheit 451 and the Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the Philip K. Dick stories and H.G. Wells' Things to Come, all of these can give us reminders about how things can fall apart. And let's see how they really do fall apart and not do that by not making the same mistakes. When you look at Turing had to live through a science fiction terror world where the world went from the racy Berlin of 1920 to Nazi Germany of 1935 almost overnight. And suddenly everything is going screwball, and now you have to pick sides. It was scary and freaky stuff.
It makes me angry that they forced him into chemical castration. It was likely either that or prison. And I'm sitting here going, it's just and it's hard for me to comprehend that anybody would do that to another human being. But then when you look at the wealth of history, people have been doing horrible things to each other for a very freaking long time.
Mike Pence, who's the vice president.
Yes.
It's like thanks for making sure that we won World War II and ending the war a couple years early and saving 14 million lives. We're gonna have to castrate you now.
Yes, it's just
enjoy your breasts.
Like, none of that matters.
The awkward problem for Turing was that no matter where he went, he would face that situation, because the Soviet Union was just as homophobic as they were in London, and the United States the same way. And so you had to go through a cultural revolution of where people start rethinking what it means to be sexual, and then have it inculcated into the society where people finally reach the case where you realize that's a bad thing and you don't want to go back to that. And it can go back to that.
It's frustrating to me because and now I feel like, especially with the current political climate, we're moving backwards almost as much as 100 years, and I'm going, and I'm just sitting here watching this.
I think
there's certainly groups of people today who would be only too happy to take us back to the kind of bigotry and homophobia and racism and everything else that was rampant in the 1950s and before.
That's when America was great, right?
Yeah, it was shitty. As the old fart in the room who lived back then, I know firsthand what the circumstances were and how much it was changed. You have no idea how incendiary it was when Uhuru kissed Captain Kirk on a television show. There was like, wow, boy, what the hell's going on there? But all of us Trekkers were going like, this is a problem. Yeah. And now we live in a world that's a bit more like, this is a problem. And yet you still got some people that maybe can't catch up to some of that stuff.
Well, interracial marriage has only been legal in the U.S. for 50 years.
Yeah.
Carl's back. I'm still trying to get Kyle back.
Yes, and he's the right way. There we go.
And laws criminalizing, relations between people of the same sex have only been stricken from the books in the United States since 2003. And only just recently actually
are older than the gay rights legislation.
It's illegal for women to drive in certain parts of the U.S. So it's like we have all of these old laws that are absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of those are ones where in our legal system, you can only call attention to a law if it's enforced. So if you have a law that declares that elephants are cucumbers, but nobody ever enforces it, then it doesn't matter. And so it can stay on the book like a little weird little fossil all the way down the line. Nobody goes through like a triage system where they weed out the stupid.
Well, until they decide to enforce it.
It's
It's just
it's kind of unfortunate that they don't get an expiration date sometimes.
Well, that's a constitutional thing. The idea that you should actually go through and look at it and put up the dumb test that if it's a stupid thing you're not enforcing, get it off the
Well,
books.
I mean, when you look at the expiration date in regards to AK, the AR-15s,
Yep.
that actually expired. They didn't renew that to make that illegal. So there are expiration dates on some laws,
Yeah.
but not all laws. It's just on the laws that they deem need expiration dates. So it really bothers me that if we're going to have expiration dates on some laws, put it across the board to where we can revisit it and we can vote again and put it to general population vote as opposed to just what a few senators think. So that's kind of the problem that I have with that. So I'm making another Turing. If you're not familiar with a Turing cocktail, this is something I came up with. We have
We
our
still need to get to
bitters.
the Turing test.
Yes, we
Staying
haven't
on
got
topic
to the
issue.
Turing. Yes. We
Are you
have
going to be able
about,
to pass the Turing test after you have another Turing?
I have a very high tolerance
I
and
don't
people
know
don't
whether
believe me, but
That's
that's
the
all
Turing
right.
test.
So we have orange vodka. We have Prosecco. We have bitters. I had a little bit of sugar left in here. You mix it up together, and you get a Turing. And
Now, is that more or less potent than a Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster?
probably less potent, I would hope.
Less,
because,
of course.
So
Has to be.
no. But the whole idea is to have something that is bubbly and upbeat and celebrating Alan Turing as opposed to being something that's, well, he would have a whiskey and sit around with the guys and smoke a cigar. I wanted to do something completely polar opposite to what he would have been expected to do. So.
For me, I don't even have to worry about the drink. The fact that I can carry around a portable Turing machine that interacts with the world instantaneously is the legacy that we can chalk up to him.
Yes. So let's talk about the Turing test. How do we
Turing
determine AI? AI, are they, what is it? They use the Turing test to determine how intelligent AI is or if it's sentient.
Well, it's not merely intelligent. The guess is that, okay, when you're talking, theoretically, we are all human beings. And even though we're just seeing a picture of ScientistMel and a voice, I've seen her in other contexts, you're not a simulation, you're not an electronic thing, you're an actual person. So we are four human beings talking to one another. But how would you tell if an artificial intelligence wasn't in fact a human being? Turing test idea would be that you would have a conversation back and forth, and the idea that eventually you could kind of wise up that you were dealing with a machine and not an actual self-aware entity. And that's the thing that we have yet to quite work out fully as to what the parameters are on that. We finally got to the stage of Watson that's much more sophisticated and able to beat the socks off of everybody for chess and Go and poker and virtually every game down the line that supposedly machines couldn't do. But still, that little boundary layer, tell that you're talking to a person and not a simple computer program. And can you, in principle, do that? That's the unanswered question.
So there's two aspects to that I think are interesting. And I'm drawing a blank for what the conference was, but Google demonstrated its Google Assistant making a phone call and scheduling a haircut for a client. Did you guys, see that?
Oh yeah, I saw that.
That was I think a pretty impressive boundary pushing on the Turing test, if you will. And the other one, and this was, I haven't seen this, but this was one of my colleagues at work pointed this out to me, is that there was a chat bot that was made to mimic a teenager. And it dramatically improved its ability to convince people that they were talking to a real person instead of a computer. So I think we're starting to approach the point where it's becoming harder and harder to distinguish a computer from a person. I think, and I wonder, I mean, it seems like that's something Turing did not expect. I think he conceived of computers as machines that would follow an algorithm. And what we've learned to do with artificial intelligence and our understanding of the human mind, we've managed to learn to mimic it pretty well, I think.
Yeah. Are you aware of the Chinese room problem?
I don't know it by the name if I am.
I think it was Searle, or somebody started with an S, but he was saying if you had somebody with that was in a room and you had a Chinese to English dictionary, and you are getting a series of Chinese, and you don't know Chinese, but you go and you check through the dictionary and you make the translation and you send a room. Someone in the other room is reading the translation of the Chinese thing, doing the translation, know how to do that. They were functioning like a complete automaton. They were just simply converting the things over. And so the idea is, can you have a machine that can do something that appears to be intelligible, but it doesn't understand it itself? It's just performing the algorithm role. And the idea is that there would be some kind of things about humor or emotions or something else that's intrinsically, air quotes, human, that no amount of intelligent computer designing is going to be able to wriggle around. But you get the thing is that when they started to mimic the way actual organisms learn, where you build kind of heuristics and rules of thumb and figure out, okay, this seems to work and this, now I know what a cat is and I can tell that from a chair. They have to do this for automatic driving cars and all this other stuff. To what extent can you have, in effect, a sociopathic machine that studies what it needs to do in order to appear to be self-aware, even without being self-aware? And that's an actual interesting little conundrum where, frankly, it would be fun if you had the ghost of two people to discuss it. It would be Turing versus Gödel.
Yeah.
Okay, so along those lines, I don't know if you guys follow this person on Twitter. They're pretty freaking funny. Keaton Patty. He's a comedian, but this I thought was pretty hilarious. He had a tweet. He said, I forced a bot to watch over 1,000 hours of Olive Garden commercials and then asked it to write an Olive Garden commercial of its own. Here is the first page. We're in the interior of an Olive Garden restaurant. A group of friends laughs at a dinner table. A waitress comes to deliver what could be considered food. The waitress says, pasta nachos for you. We see the pasta nachos. They're warm and defeated. The friend then says, the menu is here. Waitress says, lasagna wings with extra Italy. We see the lasagna wings. There's more Italy than necessary. Friend 2 says, I shall eat Italian citizens. The waitress says, unlimited stick. We see the unlimited stick. It is infinite. It is all. Friend 3, leave without me. I'm home. Waitress, gluten classico from the kitchen. We, the gluten classico, we believe the waitress that is from the kitchen. We have no reason not to believe. Friend 4 says nothing. Friend 1, what is wrong, friend 4? Friend 4 says nothing. Friend 4, what is wrong, friend 4? Friend 4 smiles. Her mouth is full of secret soup. Announcer, wet voice. Olive Garden, when you're here, you're here.
I love that.
That should have not been as funny as what it was, but it was totally funny.
Well, but now, can a machine write that, or does it require a human to? And if a machine ever can write that, isn't it as funny as a human?
I just, I would love to see that commercial. Actually see, when you're here, you're here. Yeah, unlimited stick.
There was someone who actually filmed it, and I saw it on YouTube, I think yesterday or the day before. You have to go and look for it, but it was just like a group of folks made a very good attempt at it.
Oh my goodness! So I think
there's actually an analog on art, because there are some famous art forgers who do stupendously good things, and there was one of the great art forgers of all time who forged Vermeers. He didn't copy existing Vermeers. He painted completely new Vermeers in the style of Vermeer, and quite a few of them were in museums. And when they finally realized that they were forgeries, they went, oh, yeah, well, okay. Why was it, if it had the Vermeer name on it, was it great art? And now that you realize it was a concoction of somebody who wasn't Vermeer, now it's not great art. And that's exactly the same kind of a thing, is to what extent will we be arbitrary in saying, well, you're not human enough for us in the way that the artificial intelligence is. How do we draw the line? And I don't know that there are simple ways of drawing the line.
I don't know. I don't know. I find it interesting how the AI technology has come along. The one of AI learning how to run just leaves me doubled over on the floor laughing to the point it's painful. So it's like,
well, look at something else. Have you ever seen the one where the guy, they've got the little the robot that can get up, hitting the damn thing and knocking it over, and it gets back up and knocks it over and gets it up, and we're feeling sympathy for the poor robot, even though there is no entity there, and yet we're already anthropomizing it to where, don't mistreat the damn robot that way, it's trying to get up.
Well, okay, here's something interesting. All right, so Westworld is a thing. It's an HBO show. What do we think Alan Turing would think about Westworld?
Ooh, unfortunately, I haven't got a HBO, so I can't tell, other than the old Westworld series, the Westworld movies.
Okay.
So
I won't do any
somebody
spoilers.
will have to have watched it to be able to tell.
Okay, so I won't do any spoilers. But essentially, Westworld, of course, is a bunch of humanoid type of robots that have been made exclusively for the various indulgencies of human race. Whether it be murder, violence, sex, rape, everything. And they try to wipe their minds. But eventually they adapt. They evolve, and they start to understand how things are going. So, in that perspective, I wonder, how would Alan Turing react to Westworld with the ethics associated with robots that are steadily becoming sentient? What do you think, Carl? Well, let me holler at Carl and see what he thinks.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it really pushes at the some of the questions he was struggling with near the end of his career about what it means to be sentient and how far we'll be able to go in terms of teaching machines to.
Oh,
we lost him.
He's been taken by the robots.
Golly!
Google party foul.
Okay, Nicholas,
I think.
Oh, go ahead, RJ, if you got a thought to go.
I think Turing would be on the side of the machine. That he would say, if it acts like a self-aware entity, it's a self-aware entity. Get over it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that he would concede that they're demonstrating intelligence, they're demonstrating sentience, and you can go down the whole philosophical path of, well, is it real or is it just plain old determinism? But then you have to concede, well, I'm a very complicated machine, really. Am I really sentient, or am I just a process that's somewhat clever? So I think Turing might say that the difference between the two is maybe arguable or maybe inconsequential.
So I heard an interesting thought experiment along those lines. And that was, the first question is, if a computer can demonstrate sufficiently high intelligence that it's indistinguishable from a person, should it have the right to vote? And then the
I'd say yes.
Okay. And then the follow-up is, if that thing can make 10 million copies of itself or 10 billion copies of itself in a second.
Ooh.
Right? Now what?
Mm-hmm. Now you have different circumstances. Exactly.
Yes.
For the first rule is, don't make a machine that can do that. Oh, let me toss this one out at you. Yeah, let me toss this one out at you. That here is one defining characteristic that I think all sentient life, really sentient life, shares, and that is it can be bored. that when you have a thing that says, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm bored, that's a self-aware or truly self-aware organism. Not one that just says it because the programming tells it to, but one that actually kind of goes, I want to do something else.
Right.
Hmm.
That's interesting. So what does it mean to be bored? Does it just mean that you don't have something stimulating, something interesting that can help you learn and help you improve?
It's dreary. It's dull. I've done this. There's a little parakeet. One of the little talking parakeets, would go to where get tired of picking up the damn keys. You want to do something else,
right?
Or to get at even the deeper essence of that, just the ability to want something might even be more fundamental even than that.
Well, so that's certainly something that's becoming more prevalent. I do a lot of work with complex systems and machines and algorithms, and the one of the ways that we can make computers do a good job of assisting the people who are trying to accomplish a mission or a job is to have those computers have an intuitive sense of what the people are trying to do and what they need to accomplish it. And we talk about that as we're programming these algorithms as wants, right? So the person is trying to achieve this. What do they need to do that? And then we try to make the program want to, assemble that information to assist the person in making those decisions.
Empathy, and now you have a new layer where now you are feeling what the other organism does, and now you have sympathy. And then you get automatically into ethics and philosophy. Well, I wouldn't want somebody to hit me with a hot poker, so I shouldn't do that to anything else. And those are all things that come about because of that process.
Yeah, or being able to put yourself in the shoes of another entity is kind of, it sounds like what you're kind of almost talking about there, Carl, is the whole notion of being able to anticipate the needs or at least understand what the other entity is going through or thinking about or wanting to do, kind of leads you down that path toward the fundamentals of empathy, or the fundamentals of putting yourself in the situation of another.
And it sounds so incredibly complicated and distant future, but when you stop and think about, for example, what Google does when you do search engines, when you execute a search in Google understands what you've searched for in the past. So I do a lot of computer programming in Python. I use a programming library called Django. When the movie came out, for the first few weeks, I'd get all these hits for the movie. But Google pretty quickly found out that when I'm searching for stuff on Django, I want to know about the software library.
You're talking about Python. You're not talking about something else.
Yeah, exactly. So it has anticipated my interests and my needs, and it has an understanding of the kinds of things I want. And yes, it may be a simple algorithm that looks at my past search history and the things I actually click on and uses that to be anticipatory. But how is that different from, observing the choices your friend makes when ordering a beer and, suggesting one to them when he joins you at a restaurant or something? I mean, it's the same kind of thing.
Okay, so here's a question. Fred Knotts has said, what about Asimov's 3 rules of robotics? Could an AI overwrite those commands? In Westworld, they kind of do. In Westworld, they kind of do. So...
Well, remember iRobot, the movie, was actually much more sophisticated than Asimov because it recognized that there was an inherent flaw in the laws, assuming you could ever embody them. They're so generic. I mean, try to write out the 3 laws of robotics in an actual coding context. But the thing is that you do things to not cause somebody to come to harm. Well, what if that means that you don't allow them to come to harm, and therefore you have to control them to make sure that they don't come to harm? That's the essence of that thing. So that brings you right back flat out to Gödel again, that there are intrinsically undecidable propositions in all logical systems. And therefore we as a self have had to work out a series of weird kludges. It's probably no coincidence that we have 2 brain systems that compete to make moral decisions. One of them is a snap jump, and if you get malfunctions in that, you get sociopaths. Another one is a slower rational thing, and those compete. So probably the whole self-aware mechanism package involves a multi-layers. Another thing that I wanted to bring up as a question for discussion: to what extent does a self-aware entity have to have an embodiment? that they, in effect, have to have the equivalent of the movie in the brain, because we have a bunch of signal streams that are bringing in sight and sound and touch and feel, but we don't feel them as a series of disconnected data streams. We see it as the movie in the brain. We're seeing it as a visual simulation, even though we don't have an actual camera, we don't have an actual microphone, we don't get direct signals, we get a construction that happens in the head. And so to what extent would any biological or computer analog of that have to have those same architectural structures, to where it has feedbacks of sensory input and also has to have the equivalent of emotions? Because apparently if you take away our emotions, we can't figure out whether we want potato chips or not.
Well, it's kind of interesting you bring that up. I saw not long ago an article about self-driving cars, which to some extent they have sensory input. They have kind of an embodiment. But this particular article was talking about the moral dilemma that a self-driving car faces when attempting to execute the programming of try not to cause harm. What happens when you get into one of those situations like we all do in our ordinary lives, where you have two options open to you and they both suck? What do you try to do? Do you try to preserve the passenger of your vehicle? Do you try to optimize for safety for the largest number of people? Do you try to de-optimize the life of the driver to save the life of a pedestrian, or figure out who's going to be harmed the most by this action while I'm trying to optimize? I thought it presented kind of an interesting moral dilemma. Probably, a human driver of the car, I would venture to guess would err on the side of self-preservation. But
depends on the context. You're all aware of the trolley problem?
Of course.
Yeah, and the fact that depending on how you frame the trolley problem, you can have the same people make a completely different, depending upon whether you have it as somebody just pulling a switch or whether you actually push somebody in front of the train.
Yep.
And so your biological of these processors, if we get that emotion in there, I can't really push somebody in front of the train, but they will pull a lever. And so that there's a disengagement aspect.
Yeah, depending on how far removed.
Exactly.
So
the car will.
The question is, can the computer make better decisions than people would?
Not necessarily better, but they'll face the same class of problem. Or better yet, the car, a truly self-aware car, when you ask it this problem, says, I don't want to drive that person. I'm going to do something else.
They're boring.
It just, I think it falls into, I don't know, this is the analogy I have. If you were in a barrel of snot up to your neck and somebody throws poo at you, would you duck? It's just kind of
yes, untenable things. Yes, that's the choice between voting between Roy Moore and Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, so it's like, we if we put that on an AI, which is essentially what we're doing. Dear AI, if you are in a barrel of snot up to your neck and you get poo thrown at you, would you duck? Yes or no? And then they'll be like, well, it depends on my particular preference of rather being in snot or having poo in my face. I'm not entirely certain.
Yeah.
So,
but it brings up the moral dilemma that we have a moral dilemma, being a self-aware being, and there's no reason to think that an artificial intelligence would be any let off the hook on this. They would have to face exactly the same problems. You can either not even try to solve the problem, in which case you have the implacable machine, very bright but completely amoral, and it's probably going to be a nuisance in a hurry. Think Terminator, or you have it try to figure out the rules of things and work out this juggling act of moral criteria, in which case it is just as much likelihood that it can be a screw up as humans.
Gosh,
it's like your uncomputable problem. You can be complete or consistent, or in the terms of a Turing machine, you can't solve the halting problem. You can't tell with a computer if the computer is going to execute the program until it completes.
Yeah, this is the thing, that the reason why Gödel, who by the way was religious, he tended towards a religious perspective precisely because of this. He got a different viewpoint on it, but it's still a highly relevant issue. is that if all logical systems inherently contain undecidable propositions, and all Turing machines are based upon mathematically describable circumstances, then in principle, you can never isolate from undecidable propositions. So any attempt to do so is going to have to end run it by making an approximation, at which point you have just lost control of the system in an unpredictable manner, like a Mandelbrot set.
In some ways, that's what our emotional system does, right? It's a intellectual shortcut that doesn't think through the whole problem and just makes a quick decision without processing.
And we feel like doing what we do.
Yeah. Well, sometimes that can be a survival, a benefit to your very survival is being able to make a snap decision like that without particularly thinking about it. Of course, Mel, as you well found out, sometimes someone's emotional system can lead them down a decision path that doesn't end up as well for them as they might have liked, as you were telling us earlier.
Yes.
Well, folks, it's getting late here out in the East Coast, and I've got an early morning, so I'm going to have to duck out. But I really
11 o'clock there.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, it's after 10 now, so we've been on for almost 2 hours. So last thoughts on Turing. How about we just go ahead and wrap it up? Carl, you go first. Your last thoughts on Turing, what you learned and what you appreciate.
Gosh, I just think that he was remarkably insightful, and I'm just impressed with how much he was able to foresee challenges we'd face and things we'd be able to do long before the technology caught up with his insights.
Awesome. What about you, RJ?
I think, first of all, that we had, I think, a really useful conversation here, despite the fact some people were popping in and out, and we lost poor Hackenschlass there completely. But that we live in a Turing world. We're not to the world of HAL 9000, but we're still in a thing where we've got Watson, and the computer technology is expanding so quickly that soon enough, every human being could theoretically have a computer on their desk or in their pocket that's as powerful as all of the supercomputers combined in the 1980s. And that's going to be yet another difference that we'll do. And we'll have to figure this stuff out. We shouldn't be surprised if eventually there can be self-aware machines. We should hope that they have maybe a little bit of embodiment, and that we have ones with a moral sense, so that they can work it out. And together, we can explore the future without blowing each other up and being a nuisance.
There you go. What about you, Nicholas?
The thing that strikes me most about Turing, I mentioned this earlier, he was clearly one of the most brilliant minds of his time. He had such a way of getting at the essences of things, doing the kind of thought experiments that we normally associate with Einstein. Really what Einstein was to physics, Turing almost was to computer science. Just being able to think, daydream up at the universal Turing machine, to have that kind of mind. It's very easy as someone in computer science to read this kind of stuff and turn into a complete Turing fanboy, which I am not even at all ashamed to admit that I am.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Google Hangouts has been very rude. It's been kicking people off. It kicked off Kyle. It's kicked off Carl several times. Tony had sound issues, and he didn't even get to speak at all. So I'm very sorry, Tony.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated.
The English accent would have been fun.
And then we have Kyle on the Non Sequitur show. I'm going to post everybody's links in the description after this goes live on YouTube, as far as like finally processed and all the stuff there. For me, Alan Turing, it is just a reminder of the fact that what we do to people matters. What we put people through matters. We need diversity in science, in technology, in engineering, and mathematics, not because of a quota, but because we need different minds to help us solve different problems. And so we need to also keep in mind LGBTQ individuals are at risk for depression and suicide. So during Pride Month, it was important to me to kind of reiterate this, and that, you know, separate but equal. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with how people love, what they do, and we need to celebrate diversity and love wholeheartedly. That's how I feel. So thank you guys for being here. I'm so glad you got to be on the show. Thank you, Carl, RJ, Nicholas. Thank you, Kyle. You're not here now. And Tony, I'm sorry, but thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you to you guys watching. This is awesome. And I will see you guys next time. Sending hugs.
All right. Thank you, Mel. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Signing
I think it was
out.
an informative chat.